Okay, well, welcome along to another episode of Sweet Tea and Coffee. This is episode 53. Mm-hmm. The rust is off. Season 3 is underway. We know what we're doing now.
Yeah, we have a plan.
Back in the saddle.
Yeah.
Any other phrases you want to... The rust is off, back in the saddle. Anything else that fits what we're doing?
Dust? I don't know. Rust,
oh,
dust.
Yeah, dust. Yeah. We knocked the dust off. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's official. Okay. Well, we've got Brent McLemore in here, and that may be an unfamiliar name to you because it was an unfamiliar name to all of Nacogdoches until recently, but we're excited to have Brent here with us and hanging out. He's going to talk about, I'll just go ahead and give you a teaser. There is a story in here called the Fight and Bite story.
Yeah.
And
I don't have a clue about this story. Kendall knows the story apparently, but
no, not well.
I keep hearing about this Fight and Bite thing.
It's going to happen.
I'm curious. I'm excited.
It did happen.
It did happen, and we're going to,
it's a true story.
And we are going to talk about it. So, stick around for this episode 5-3 with Brent McLemore. Okay, well, I said we've got Brent McLemore in here. And before we get to Fight and Bite, we got some real priorities we need to set out. And we don't know because he's not revealed whether he's a sweet tea or coffee guy. He's just drinking water right here this afternoon with us. So we gotta at least start there. Let the folks get to know you a little bit, Brent. Sweet tea or coffee, and then defend your stance.
Okay. If I have to choose one, I'm taking coffee.
Okay, so you're a both.
I'm a both guy for sure, but more consistently coffee. Sweet tea, if I were growing up, like if this were 20 years ago, it would have been sweet tea all day, every day. Yeah. And it would have been that way for even probably into my 20s. But now, long removed from my 20s and with 2 children, it is coffee.
The coffee's a necessity. Yeah.
So coffee all the way. And they both have water in them. So like today, I'm just...
neutral.
I'm straight down the middle. Yeah.
I didn't want them to be offended either.
Okay, so do you a coffee snob? Like you get really into it, or is it more coffee for survival? What's your coffee
for
take?
survival. Yeah. I can be an elitist and a snob about certain things, but not when it comes to coffee. When it comes to caffeine, just give it to me.
Yeah, it's just a daily necessity.
Exactly.
So that's funny. Well, welcome. It's good to have you. We're glad you came in. You guys moved here not too long ago.
Right.
You are brand new in Nacogdoches.
Brand new to Nacogdoches, to Texas, brand new, yeah.
Absolutely. And you came here via New Orleans?
Yep, via New Orleans, and before that it was East Tennessee, but before that it was Mississippi, which is where I'm from.
Okay, so tell us about where you grew up, where you're from, and what was childhood like?
Yeah, so I grew up in North Mississippi, and northeast corner there, actually, in and around, I was born in Tupelo, and then I grew up north of there. And so pretty much everywhere in Mississippi is rural, small town.
Yeah.
And there's like one metropolitan area, and it's Jackson, the capital, and it's not much of a metro area when you compare it to other places. But so I grew up in a small rural setting, mostly a small town rural setting. And anyway, it was, growing up was, I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and it was, I think typical in some ways, but I did grow up in, 2 different houses as well. So I had my folks split after me. I was such a bad baby, Just kidding. Yeah. But they split. So I grew up in 2 houses. I have brothers and sisters on both sides. And so I was, just kind of bouncing around back and forth. I didn't really grow up in church as far as, how I came to know the Lord. I grew up around church and didn't really have any kind of consistent discipleship or anything like that until... even when I was in high school, it wasn't very consistent because what happened is my folks split. Then I lived with my mom and visited my dad, and there was a period of time where I stopped going to my dad's actually, and so for about 2 years. And then during that time, he became a Christian, and he got to know the Lord and had a really radical change in his lifestyle because he was before that had lived very differently than after. And so for me, I had also gotten really curious about, the gospel, I guess. I mean, Jesus and what his importance to me was as a kid, and just kind of curious about God and church and Christianity, and had done things like VBS and visited church from time to time. Again, nothing consistent. So actually, during that period of time, those 2 years when my dad became a Christian, that was the first time I remember responding to prompting from the Holy Spirit that, hey, you do need Jesus. Like Jesus is I couldn't probably articulate like why he was my answer, like the reason I needed him completely.
Right.
And some of that was totally motivated by fear because of this idea of hell and like being punished forever. Yeah. And I was like scary as all get out, for a kid especially. And I was like, man, I think Jesus is why I don't have to deal with that. But also I think I want to be a Christian. So yeah, let's do this thing. So basically that was kind of my reasoning as a kid, like 11 or so, I guess I was.
So you said that, was it your dad's conversion that?
No, this was happening like simultaneous while we were not seeing each other. Like, so I'm not even like visiting my dad.
I mean, so you're 11 at the time or younger. I mean, what, you used the word curious. What
that's a good question.
Creates the curiosity?
Yeah. So I grew up around church, and there were periods of times as a kid where we were more consistently visiting and going and attending church. But again, not anything that was, it was not a part of like weekly life, or anything like that. Yeah. And so I had gotten familiar with church, and I'd gotten familiar with the Bible. I'd gotten familiar with the gospel and Jesus as a result. And so there was a familiarity there. And I think you can't grow up in the South, or at least when I was growing up,
to have some exposure there.
Exactly. You have to have some exposure. And so I had gotten exposed to this. I think too, my grandmother had died a couple of years before that. My maternal grandmother passed away from cancer. And that really kind of shook me for a moment. And I thought, man, what I started thinking about like, what's next? Like, what happens after this? And I think that probably that. Plus, I had thought like I had a cousin when he was 8. This was at a family Christmas get together. We had a huge family. This is on my mom's side as well. Her father's side, we had a lot. He had a lot of brothers and sisters, and we would get together and have really awesome Christmas get-togethers because there's so many people and cousins and whatnot. And one of my cousins actually. At 8, he had come to know the Lord and talked about that experience. Talked about his conversion and talked about the whole experience. And then that really stuck with me. At 8 years old, I was the same age as him. I was like, "That's cool for you. That's really cool, man. Awesome." But didn't really think about how it applied to me at that point in time individually. And I remember that actually being something that I thought about, like, "Oh, this is what that cousin was talking about. This is what Jordan was talking about. Maybe this now applies to me. I can connect the dots, like this is maybe something that I need to do." So I think all of those things just sort of accumulated slowly over time, and that kind of curiosity was there and the familiarity, and it was like, okay, let's do this. And so, and I was on my own. I was like in the top bunk of my bed, and I was just like, I prayed there to receive Christ as my Savior,
Wow.
And then I told my mom about it. And at that point in time, we were more consistently visiting a church and at a church as well. So there was probably some of that was playing a role in it too. And so we actually went to that church and I got baptized there, like day after or some soon after. I can't remember exactly when it happened. Maybe it was it was like just a ceremony for me to be baptized. That's what what we did. It was like one of my friends from school who happened to attend that church. He and his mom were there, and it was me and my mom, and pastor baptized me, and then I went on, and from there again, no real consistent discipleship, unfortunately, because it was again kind of waxing and waning a little bit here and there, depending on where we were in life. And then also, I did at that point I was starting to visit my dad again. And
so that's got to be interesting because behind the scenes, he's having this radical change.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So what's that like when you start hanging out with him again? It's like, wait a minute, is this the same guy? Was that a shock to you, or what was that?
Yeah, it was a shock. I remember my dad pulling up one Sunday because he would come by every once in a while just to check in and try to encourage me to at least consider hanging back out with him, coming back and visiting them. And this one Sunday he came and he pulled up and he was in a minivan, which I was like, this is not my dad's typical ride. And then he also got out and he was in like khaki pants and a polo, like button up, not polo, but a button up short sleeve shirt. Right. And I was like, this is not my dad's typical attire. What's going on here, And he came over and I was like, hey, Dad. And we're talking and he's like, oh yeah, I'm coming from church. And I was like, church, okay. And that, I remember being a moment, I was like, what's happened here? And then
something's going on.
Something's going on. And then my grandmother also, his mom played a big role in me getting me back over, kind of coaxing me back in, his mom and my grandfather. So my grandmother and grandfather, they actually were consistently reaching out as well. And I actually went and stayed with them one afternoon, and it turned into like, hey, won't you stay the night, And I was like, yeah, why not, Yeah. And then my dad and my stepmom, who's been my stepmom, like, for 30-something years now, over 30 years. But they came and stayed there, slept on the floor, like really going the extra mile to like show like, hey,
wow,
we want to spend time with you,
Right. Yeah.
And so that really then became like, for me, I was like, hey, I'm going to start going back and visiting and rekindling these relationships, reconnecting here. And so when I did, my dad was radically different to me. Like he was still young, I guess, in his faith, but at the same time, very much like dedicated, like devoted, like, and still to this day, very much a testament of, faithfulness.
How did that impact you and because at this point you're now very young in your faith. And
yes. And very encouraging. So anytime I was going to visit him, I was getting very consistent discipleship in terms of like every time I was there, we were, if it was a weekend visit, which was typical, then I could plan on being at church. And so there was a lot of consistency in that, but that was every other week. And then during the summers, I'd spend some time there. And then I think probably the biggest difference is once I got to the age where I could work and I started working, and I wasn't as consistently visiting. I didn't have as much free time. I'd still go and stay and spend time with them, but I just wasn't spending as much time, and I had a little bit more independence or whatever the case may have been. That's where some of the inconsistency kind of picked back up, and I think just a lack of me really being committed and mature came into play, and that's when I kind of sowed a few wild oats there in my late teenage years.
Right.
Yeah, because you have this period of time, and I want to get to it, but I guess so when you're a teenager all the way up till you're 20, and 20 is where we have this this fight and bite moment. But and we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. Hold on, everybody. But fast forward. Get us a fast forward all the way till now. We said, okay, you started in Mississippi and made your way to Nacogdoches. Give everybody an idea of what you guys are doing here. You're obviously involved with SFA. What do you do? Give us a window into your crew now and what you do here, and then we'll jump back to those years. Yeah, so fast forward to now, basically what we do here, we got here in January. So we're still very new. But yeah, I came here to work at SFA, so I work as the director for the Center for Career and Professional Development. It's a big fancy title, it sounds like. Yeah, that's why I had you say it. Yes. I'm always messing up people's titles in here. We abbreviate to CCPD. There you go. That's good. It's so much easier. I could have done that. Yeah. With notes. With notes. So CCPD is Career Services for the campus. And so we have, if you've been at college or, are familiar with college, that there's probably some sort of office related to career services and helping students basically connect what it is that they're doing in the classroom with opportunities. Right. So, for example, it could be helping them in that process of job and internship search and, through the application process. So some very practical things like that, critiquing documents for them, helping them practice interviewing, that kind of thing. But then also exploration, like coaching appointments where we really get into exploration of like, what is it that you want to do? So that gets into some of the idea of like helping them sort of vocationally discern, what is going on, where are they going? How does this major align with what they want to do with their career? Or is this a really good fit for them, a best fit for them when they consider all their options and what they want their type of work to be and their, what they want their work to be about and that kind of thing. Yeah. But then we also are employer facing in that we host career fairs, and so we'll have 4 or 5 career fairs a semester that we host, and that's an opportunity for us to connect students to employers and vice versa. And we'll work with faculty and staff of the various colleges the colleges at SFA to do presentations in the classroom, but also with some of the employer things and some of the events that we host. We work with them on some of the fairs. So it's really multifaceted and very much anything related to career, what these students might be doing. It kind of touches on a lot of those points. Blake, it was somebody like Brent when I started school. I think I've shared this story before. Somebody like Brent that looked at me after looking at my kind of personality survey and my major of petroleum engineering, and they looked at me and very kindly we were like, we don't really see your type.
This is not adding up.
Very much. Yeah, this is. You might want to move a different direction. And you're like, no, it's okay. I'll be good. And they're like, I don't know, and they turned out to be right. Okay, so you got 2 little girls, wife Lindsay. You guys have just moved to Nacogdoches.
That's right.
You're fresh here.
Yeah.
And part of your story is you wanted to escape hometown.
That is right.
You were ready to run. And so you said everywhere in Mississippi is
small town,
rural. And my experience with Mississippi is very much that. The one time I thought I was going to be in on the news for being murdered was in Mississippi. I was working with the Mays. Have you heard this story?
No, but I have a moment where I was in Mississippi and I thought I may not make it out of this.
Okay.
Alive.
So you're talking about being rural.
Yeah.
I think we may have flown into.
That's fun.
We may have flown into Jackson. Anyway, we get there.
You haven't experienced Mississippi unless your life has been
I guess that's just part of it. Yeah.
Well, you were talking about it being rural, and just reminded me of this. This guy picks us up. This guy that we're partnered with for this show when I was working with the Mays, and we all pile in. It's late at night. Everybody's exhausted, and he goes, "Okay, guys, it's a little bit of a drive, but just relax." So we all eventually, it's late, and we all eventually just kind of doze off. And I just remember waking back up. And everybody else is kind of waking back up as well, because we're kind of bumping down some road, looking around out, and it's dark, but you can tell we're nowhere. This is nowhere. There's no light, and looking at the watch and going, oh my gosh, I slept a while and we're still in nowhere. This is it. Like, this guy's hauling us out. This is it. This is over. My life's about to end here in rural Mississippi. Anyway, we made it. We're allowed to tell a story. But anyway, so you're trying to get out of that. What's your mentality as a teenager? Like, ready to break free, do your own thing? I mean,
so I grew up in a small town. So, I mean, yes, it's rural. Everywhere in Mississippi, you can find the woods pretty quick, right?
Yeah.
And so my town, like my small town, which is smaller than Nac, to be honest, even now, was like the town in our county, And so it was where there was opportunity. And I was like, there's not a lot of opportunity here, Yeah. And in fact, so for me, it was getting ready to graduate and not sure what I was doing. To be honest, I had no clue. And so I thought, I got to figure something out. I mean, college seems like a possibility. I don't know. I was a terrible high school student, and I didn't know anything about college because I'm a first-generation college student as well. And so it was really kind of an idea, and a very foreign idea at that. And I was like, I don't know what to do about this, but maybe it's something I could do. And but then I had a buddy who was looking at joining the military. He was looking actually at the Marine Corps and had entered the delayed entry program for them. And one night he said, "Why don't you do it with me?" And I was like, okay. So I was just so like,
big future decision made right there.
Yeah, exactly. I was just so clueless. And then I was like, oh, sure. And so I did. I did enlist in the delayed entry program for the Marine Corps. Now that I didn't go, I'll save that. I'll save the suspense and just go ahead and tell you what I ended up doing is I entered the delayed entry program. And I moved through almost all my senior year with the intentions of going into the Marine Corps. And I had volunteered for the infantry because that's what my buddy could do, and then we were trying to do the buddy system together, and they were, as we were learning, as kind of the rumor mill starts, it's like, hey, the buddy system doesn't really work all that well, or it's maybe you go through boot camp together, but then there's no guarantee after that. Yeah. And I was like, man, do I really want to commit to the infantry? Which is no knocking that, but I had other opportunities as well that I could pursue, and apparently my ASVAB score was high enough that I could get tested for the intelligence, and I was like, that seems exciting, right? And so I was like, maybe I could do that. So I start trying to work with a recruiter to see if I can get all that lined up. But at that point, I'd already enlisted, and it was like kicking the can, and I was like, guys, come on, what's happening here? Like, can you at least give me a chance to get out of or get into an MOS that I'm excited about. And I was, again, the infantry was something that I was willing to do, and it was something that I would have done if I couldn't have gotten out of it. But then when I got to that summer after graduating, I remember one of my friends called and said, "Hey, dude, are you leaving in like 2 weeks?" And I still had like a month out from our departure date, and I was like, "No, it's like a month." And he's like, "Well," and he mentioned my friend. He's like, he's telling folks that you're leaving in like 2 weeks. And I was like, no, we're not leaving in 2 weeks. And I don't know if he was just saying that or if he had gotten that word that it could be a possibility.
Yeah.
I hadn't received any kind of word that it could be a possibility. I don't know what was happening there, but I did know what I do know in that moment is it like clicked with me real quick. Like, all right, I'm not ready to leave in a month's time. Like I need to either figure out, because I also kind of coming back to some of that curiosity that I had at, those preteen years, I was really starting to wrestle again with like, what is this all about?
Yeah.
What the heck is going on? Like my life is, how should I be living my life? And like some of these questions of, trying to find meaning and make meaning of it all, were really pressing hard on me. And I was like, I got to figure some things out, because for me, what I realized is like, I know so little about myself right now that it's just the less I know is the more they can change. Right. So if I get there, they're going to strip me down. I know that. That's like part of what happens. And there's a good in that. But they're going to build me back up the way they want me and need me. And I'm not sure I want to do that. I'm not sure I want to go through this experience.
That is remarkable clarity for that. I mean,
at 17.
Wow. Yeah.
But it hit me just boom, like an epiphany. And I was like, I got to figure some things out and see if this is my best option. College was still a possibility for me. I hadn't taken the ACT though, because I graduated high school that May. This was like June, July or whatever. And I was like, I guess I need to figure out what I'm going to do. So I called the recruiter and I'm like, hey, look, this is what's going on. Like, I don't know how to explain this. I'm still open to this. In fact, I was telling them like, I'm open to a couple things. One, of course, I'm interested in the opportunity to see if I could do the intelligence, which I don't know that I could have, but at least from a ASVAB score or whatever standpoint, they could have given me a shot. But then also I'm interested in, maybe the possibility of going to college and then maybe coming back into officer training school. And so those were the things that I was trying to kind of work with them on. And then in the meantime, go ahead and enroll in college. And so there was a community college in my hometown, and that's what I did. I enrolled in community college and then decided to sort of set the Marine Corps on the back burner and see like what might come of that down the road. But then my life deviated so far and so much that even that, like looking back into the military as an option just wasn't there anymore. And so I didn't end up doing that. But that need for me to really figure out who I was still very apparent, very present. And also in that process, figure out, I think subconsciously, like who God is and how we should live as a result of who God is. Right. And so that's where like that first year of college was basically me just stumbling my way through college and stumbling through like that search as well. And that gets me into the summer after. That would have been, I guess, that summer after, maybe. Was that I think that was it. It's a little fuzzy. I hadn't talked about it in a while. But it was during the summer, like right before. I guess it would have been, that summer going into what would have been maybe my second year of college.
Well, you said things eventually, you used the phrase deviate so far.
Yeah.
That was, so is that deviation, is that change in a moment? Is that a slow, gradual thing?
Yeah.
And what's the inflection point for you that sets things on a very different trajectory?
Yeah. So for me, so after I was like, okay, I'm here at college. I'm going to be open to this experience and see what happens here. And I was still a poor student. Poor student in terms of like poor. I was not studious.
Right.
I was like kind of had just sort of barely moved my way through high school successfully, like just enough to get out of high school. And the expectations from my folks were like, graduate high school, get a job, and don't be a bum, basically. Yeah, and I was like meeting that standard for the most part. I was like, okay, I can do that. So that's kind of the same low bar I set for myself in college, and yet being open to the experience, though, I started considering, okay, if I'm going to do college and I'm not going to do the military, what would I do? And I started thinking about possibility of majors, and honestly, like the work I do now probably is a lot of it's informed by my own experience, of course.
Like the process
just wandering through, and needing somebody like me, basically, to be like, hey, look, let me tell you, these are some resources available to you. These are some questions you need to be asking. These are ways in which you can approach this whole search and it be more effective for you. And so anyway, that was sort of a slow, gradual thing, the deviation early on. And then it just became one of those things that was like, I'll revisit the military once I get to where I transferred to. And there was like an ROTC program. I was like, I can revisit it then. But before I transfer to ultimately where I went to, my 4-year university, there's some significant moments that occur. One significant moment is the fight, of course. If we would like to talk about
Let's go. I think we've been hanging on and ready. Let's go.
Yeah. So younger Brent was a little bit more rebellious at times, and certainly not as mild mannered as older Brent seems, and had some poor choices that he made consistently, and had some friends that were good guys that were also making some poor choices.
Yeah.
So I won't get into the lead up to this fight, but it was a yard fight. I'll say that, and it was a bunch of guys that I knew, friends that I knew, that had gotten into a little dispute with some other guys that were from the county. All these county kids coming in making trouble.
Yeah.
But
Blake's a county kid.
Yeah. Oh
yeah. Yeah. They had taken, like, one of my buddies, the brothers, was hanging out with these guys, and they had taken his truck and went off on some road like you were on, Kendall, like back road where it goes on forever, and just left it. But they didn't know if they had stolen it or what had happened. And so everybody was up in arms about it, mad about it. And they were a lot of words exchanged that we will not share here.
Yeah.
And then the brother was kind of confused as to how things were playing out. And so I get called in to sort of as reinforcements, like, hey, this thing is happening, it's going down. And so I'm kind of excited, to be honest, because I'm an idiot. And so we get there, but it's interesting. Like, as we get there, I'm like, you know what? Maybe I should be a peacemaker in this moment. Maybe there's a way for me to mediate and figure out what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that was probably the prompting of the Holy Spirit, because that switch flipped like just as we were getting near to the house and pulling up. And sure enough, the guys that are the ones that everybody's got the beef with are hanging out in the driveway with one guy that's a part of our crew, so to speak, and they're just kind of, he's there actually doing sort of like the cool kind of being collected, mediating kind of role. And I'm now I have put my shirt back on.
If this is backwoods Mississippi, I don't know.
I mean, we don't even have shoes.
Yeah.
So, but no. So I'm walking out, and I'm like, okay, because I know who the people are that the beef is with, because I know them vaguely. It's a small town, small town surrounded by small towns, and you kind of get to know folks. You grow up there long enough.
Yeah.
So I know faces, or I know, hey, at least these are not the people that I'm here for,
Yeah.
And so anyway, what happens is, I step out and I walk in and to the house after I say hello to everybody on the driveway there, and then I'm like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh, this once so and so gets back, this is going to happen." And so I'm thinking, man, I've got to figure out what I'm doing here.
Wow.
And so we step all back into the yard, because this other group that we're waiting on comes in. This is the friends that I'm closest to are the ones that we're waiting on to get there. And when they do, all of a sudden it's like, hey, now who's got the problem with who? And so we're in the yard, and there's all this talk, and some things are said, and I am at that point in time a bit prideful. Like, I don't want to get pushed around, and so I'm kind of amazed at all of the talk and the chirping that was happening. And then here's the main guy, and he is just dogging these folks, and nobody's saying anything. And so my pride is just like bubbling up inside. And I just sort of, I kind of chuckle a little bit. And he's like, "Are you laughing at me?" And I'm like, No, I'm laughing at the situation. And then, and then he's like, "Good, so you better not be laughing at me." And I was like,
Come on.
And so then he like feigns a punch, like he's gonna punch me. And I just like duck back out of the way, but he doesn't swing. And then he's like, "That's right. you better not say a thing. You better stop talking. And I said, I'm still talking. Like an idiot, you know. And this guy is tall, big guy, compared to me anyway at that point in time. I was more athletic then. Of course, this was like 20 years ago, you know, so I was in better shape and more athletic. But I still wasn't like over 6 foot, which is like where he's at. He's like a high school basketball star, you know, like that has graduated. And his life, and I'll talk about that in a second, but it kind of derailed anyway. But after I said I'm still talking, he shoves me, and I turn around, and that's when pop. There's just a fist right there in front of my face, and I can't do a thing about it except take it. And so that causes me to, you know, whip my neck around, and the next thing I know, I'm just like turned around and I'm diving at him. You know, I'm like, he's on my shoulder and into the ground, right? And so then we were wrestling, and this is like, oh, this is a great fight. You know, this is
this is
mayhem is unleashed.
This is mayhem.
Wow.
I'm throwing him on the car. We're sliding down to the driveway, and it's like, yeah, it's a lot of fun for somebody who's pumped up on adrenaline and testosterone at that point in time. And then in the fight, though, he pulls my hair back, and then he bites me, and I'm thinking, this guy is fighting like my sister. You know, like, what is happening here? Like, this guy is easily not like this is not a technique that you should be getting into or you know, diving into or whatever. Yeah. But anyway, he did. He bit me. And I didn't think much about it other than that. And so long story short, the fight gets resolved. We kind of get locked up into a stalemate, and it just ends. Like we're the last two fighting. It turns out, like, after he punched me, what that did is, like, the other guys, that initiated them.
Oh my goodness.
And so they took off for the others and left me with Goliath, you know? And so, like, there's like literally like 4 or 5 to like 2 guys over here, and then me and Goliath. And one guy there, I do remember one friend that came in and kind of got a sucker punch on him, but then otherwise it was just me and him. and so then we're at the stalemate. We finish up and then we're done, and we've had it's been, you know, it's like, we nod and move on. He's busted my nose wide open, of course. That was the only hit he got, but it was a good one.
But it was a good one.
Yeah, I was like, I got to protect my face. It ain't that pretty, but I need to breathe out my nose.
Yeah.
So anyway, cops get called, they come, and I leave with we pretend like nothing's happened. When they get there, everybody's
you're
like,
all beat up and bloody.
Everybody's friends, and we're like, the culprits have left. So, and so, like, you know, it goes on about, we go on our way. Well, the next day I hear that that we're talking about the fight and the bite, the fight and the bite.
Yeah.
And somebody mentions, we've heard he's got hepatitis C, and I was like, what? And I was like, well, that's probably just a pile on, like just something that they're piling on to this guy because he's just a sad story at that point in his life. I don't know where he's at now and what's going on. But anyway, at that point, I thought that's not true. That's just a rumor. I heard it a second time that day, and it was a different circumstance, different situation. And then I was like, oh, okay, well.
This is not
probably,
looking good.
It's probably still a rumor, though, right? I'm a little more concerned. But third time I heard it, I was like, okay. It was, again, later on in the day, separate occasion, separate time. And then at that point, I'm like, oh, this is not good. And I was really concerned. And because I didn't know much about it other than at that time it was incurable. I think in the recent years, they've found a cure for it. But it was incurable, and it was something that you'd have to just kind of live with, and it could really impact the way you live your life and what plans you have, you know. And for me, I began to think, man, I do want to at some point have a wife and family, and I'm not sure they're gonna kind of saddle up with me if this is something that they've got to live with and potentially contract. Like, they can't do that, you know. So it really shook me, and I was working. This was the next day and that night after, and I was working, and I just remember just feeling such a sense of dread all of a sudden, like, oh, I've made some bad decisions, but this one might be the worst, you know, and I don't know what I'm going to do here. And so I went into the back because I still, at that point in time, I still would acknowledge God and would have a respect for God with my words, probably, and with certain things, like I might have like particular way I would want to honor Him that was kind of like really nitpicky, but my life was not in any way otherwise really kind of bent toward that posture or you know, living a lifestyle that would honor Him. So I still at that point was like, I gotta pray. And so I just asked my buddies, hey, can you watch the front while I go in the back? I was working at a gas station. I walked in the back, and then I was back there, saying my piece, but having no peace. I confessed that, Lord, I know that this is a result of my own decisions, like the circumstances that I have placed myself in. But if there's any way you can pass this cup from me, please do. And so I prayed that prayer, and then I came back out to finish up my shift, and then they were like, hey, we're going to go hang out and, party and this or that. You want to go? And I was like, I'm just going to go home, and I'll catch y'all later. So instead of going home, though, to my mom's, at that time would have been where I'd have probably landed, I went next door to my grandparents when my grandmother was a retired nurse, and I was like, here's the deal. This is what I've done. This is what is a possibility. I want to know how much trouble I'm in, and what do I need to know, and how dangerous is this thing? So we came in, and she calls, she's like, well, she kind of gives me a little bit of a 411, and she even likes pulling out some of her medical books, and then and then she's a retired nurse, so she's not working any longer, but she still has contacts, obviously, and I think she just called the ER, talked to somebody there, and they're like, bring him in the next day, tomorrow. There's nothing really we could do. And there wasn't, I won't get into too many details here other than that they did take blood, and they did tell me that, there was tests that they'll run, but I'll need to come back in a couple of weeks and do this again because it's so early in the process. Mm-hmm. So sure enough, they did. But before I actually got to the ER, that night, on the couch at my grandparents, I am broken. In so many ways. I'm broken because I'm thinking I've ruined my future here. I'm broken because I think that, again, this is a terrible situation. But then as I'm working through that and really feeling stupid and feeling sort of that dread and that despair, I'm starting to realize that, man, I've had a very legalistic view of what it is to follow God, and very legalistic view of Christianity in general. And the commandments for me were just laws. I viewed that very legalistically. But then all of a sudden, in that moment, I'm realizing those things are there in place to protect me from me, right? And that if I had been living in a way that honored God, that I would have never gotten myself into the situation. Not that bad things don't happen and suffering doesn't happen, but not the way this transpired, right? And so I became broken because then I started seeing grace in the commandments. That was new for me, like the idea of something about the law being something about more than just obeying a law. It was like, oh, here's grace in this, because it is for you to help you see how you could live your life in a way that honors God. And by honoring God, you're living a life that is protecting you in some ways as well. Like it's not that you are protected from bad things or suffering, but again, from what I found myself in that kind of situation, you don't get yourself into that kind of thing necessarily when you're trying to honor God, And so that was revolutionary for me. Like that was like, whoa, grace in the commandments. And then it also immediately went into God really does love us.
Wow.
And he really does love me. And then I was just broken, and I was like sobbing, like, oh my goodness, I am an idiot. Yeah. And you love me, God. And so then I'm just crying, and I'm just like, okay, God, whatever's left of my life from this moment on, 5 years or 50, it's yours. And then that was for me a catalyst. That was really where
it changed from a get me out of this to okay, whatever this is.
Yes, absolutely. Like in that moment, I'm like, whatever. Like if I've got it, I've done it to myself. I have to own that and accept that. But if I have it, it's whatever I've got left is yours. So like if it's going to be something that hinders me, that shortens my life, or whatever the case it is, I don't care. I don't need you to heal me for me to live in a way that honors you. Like I am living for you from here on. That was a switch that flipped for me. Yeah. And so then that's what I've tried to do ever since then. Like that, I went in, like that was August. And so we started our new semester up shortly after that. And it was the most repentive kind of living I've ever had, like it's still, I try to be very intentional in that. And what I mean by like, like sort of repentant lifestyle, it was like, I was very intentional about what I was surrounding myself with, who I was surrounding myself with. I had a lot of love for my friends, but they understood too that I was going through some things, I know. and then they also saw that change in me.
Yeah.
I had them, sometimes they would joke around like, I know you're a man of the Lord, but I'll still whoop your, that kind of stuff, but there was an acknowledgement that Brent was changing.
Yeah.
Like there were some changes there, and that they were okay with that, like that was my journey. And then I also I had different friends at college than those that I had grown up with. And so then I started hanging out with these friends at college that were very much like-minded, very spiritually curious, and mostly, all of them were Christians. And so in terms of like, that's the faith that they were coming from. And also in that place of like growth and like trying to sort of figure out and own their faith and figure out, why they believe what they believe. And that was for me too. Like I was like it felt so new to me. Like even though I'd grown up again around church and in and out of church and I had a familiarity with it, I still, at that point, I remember actually I went to one of the moms of a couple of guys I graduated with, some friends of mine, and I went to that mom or to their mom because she was like the most spiritual lady I knew. Like she was the most Christian lady I knew. And I was just like, in tears because I was like, I told her what all had happened. And she's like, and I was like, Miss Linda, I just want to know, I know what I believe. I want to know why I believe it now, And so I'm like trying to really dig in at that point and figure out, okay, I don't want to just take it on face value. I don't want to get this information from the pulpit or from, secondhand or firsthand or whatever. I want it firsthand. I want to actually grow and learn, right? Yeah. I want to be much more intentional about this. And so that just so happened that they were starting a Bible study on like fundamentals, foundational stuff, on that next Wednesday. And I was like, sign me up. And so there I was. And anyway, so there was like, that began like growth after growth. It was like milestone after milestone. I felt like I was on, like sort of like a spiritual rocket ship. It was like, boom, what have I been missing out on, Yeah. And so a lot of growth then. And of course, there's a lot of growth that's happening, but I'm still just a basic college student at best, with my study habits. So there's still some maturity issues, but I'm still like growing just leaps and bounds in terms of my walk with the Lord at that point.
Man, I think that's that moment. Now, not everybody has the fight and bite story.
Right.
Thanks for sharing that with us. But that moment of crisis, let's call it that, is something we hear all the time. It's something that people go through a lot. Yeah. And I'm just curious. I'd love to just kind of close right here. I'm curious if you had an opportunity. You're sitting in your living room in Nacogdoches, and a 20-year-old knocks on your door and comes in and tells you, "Here I am." And the place where they're at is in that moment of crisis. That moment of crisis that you were in, where all of a sudden the reality of the direction that they're going and where they actually want to go, where they see that for what it is, that those things are diametrically opposed, that I'm living a life that is different from who I know that I am. And I don't know really how to reconcile the two. And I'm kind of in that moment of crisis, and they knock on the door, and you get to see that 20-year-old post fight in that moment of tension. Having now gone through that and a few years on this side of 20.
Yeah.
Just a few. I said that. What do you say? That kid comes in that moment to your house, to your living room, sits on the couch. What's the conversation like? How do you talk to somebody about that moment of crisis, and what do you coach them in? How do you address it?
Yeah. So I think, I've had conversations with people in moments of crisis since then, of course. And one of the things too, for me, like sometimes a moment of crisis will be if it's a person that is trying to follow the Lord and have been living a life that would otherwise honor them, but they have made a poor decision and they've gotten themselves in a situation now that seems like they have failed, in terms of living up to a way in which that would honor God. But for me, in those moments, I'm particularly if it's a person of faith or a person that has been seeking, I would want to go back to the fact that nothing is a surprise to God. Like He has seen your whole story unfold. Yeah. And so this is very surprising for you and maybe devastating in terms of, especially if you're a person of faith, or if you're a Christian that's walking sincerely and practicing and trying your best to live in a way that honors God, being in tune with the Holy Spirit, doing everything you can to actually, exemplify a Christian life, a Christ-like life, and then you have a moment like that, then I would say all of the growth that came before that moment and all those moments that you remember back to and thought, man, this is amazing. This is amazing. God was giving you that knowing this was coming, right? And so don't forget that he is so gracious and so loving that he was allowing you to have these moments, knowing this one was coming, where you were going to, you can use whatever language you want, like spit in his face, just flat out defy him and rebel against what he would want you to do. And yet he gave you that. And so you can get stuck right here. Or you can remember this is the God that you serve, and that he knew that and still gave you that all that time with him, those precious moments. Yeah. And there are still more that can come, right? You can use this as a catalyst, right? This can be a point of declaration where you're like, no, not again, right? And really begin to live that life of repentance from that moment on, and like kind of hit the reset, if you will, and have a short memory, but at the same time a long-term memory. You don't want to you don't want to get yourself in that place of where you're walking in condemnation, right? Yeah, as it talks about, you don't want to, like Romans chapter 8. 7, 8, and 9. Like there's a lot going on right there, right? Yeah. Like, hey, this whole body, I was very much in chapter 7 for a long time. Like, man, and I think we all find ourselves there. Like at times we're like, what I want to do is honor you, and yet in me is a war, right? Like what is going on? And then chapter 8 is like, well, praise God, because Jesus Christ has made it possible for me to find victory and not to stay in this place of condemnation, but to live in that kind of freedom, not so that I can go out and just live any way I want, but because I'm empowered at that moment, when I hit that rock bottom low, to really, acknowledge that and confess that and be real about that, take ownership of that, but then be able to pivot and repent. Like those are the same word, basically. And then move forward from that place stronger and also more humble, which you got to have. You got to be humble, right? And so sometimes for me, that bite was a blessing. It was a gift. That moment was a gift. Now the moments after that, they didn't feel terrible, like it. Right? Thankfully, full disclosure, I did not get hepatitis C, but it was enough for me in that moment to think I may have ruined my life. This is a terrible choice I have made.
That's how easily it can happen.
Yes, exactly. Wow. And so for me, looking back on it, anything really, and I remember having a conversation with a friend not long after that who had a similar story where they had different choices and sort of different circumstances, but had gotten to a point where they had a similar sort of moment of clarity and crisis maybe. But he was talking about anything that leads you closer to the Lord and gets you closer to that relationship and more or deeper into that relationship is a blessing, even when it's terrible, right? And so that's what that moment for me is a blessing, a gift, because it did draw me. It put me on a trajectory that I don't know I would be on otherwise, or how long it would have taken me to get there, and certainly humbled me and brought about a great sense of appreciation. And so that would be certainly a note I would want to make and an impression I would want to leave with that person in that moment as well.
Yeah, it gives the perspective that you need on how big God is and how in tune he is to everything that's going on in our heart and life. And that's so important because we get zoomed in on the moment.
Yes.
And we need that perspective.
Yes.
So, man, thank you so much for sharing all of that.
What a great story.
What a cool story. I appreciate that. And obviously there's so much more to Brent's story, to Lindsay's story. We didn't even get into family and kiddos and all that kind of fun stuff. But I really appreciate you stopping by. And we're glad that all the way from Mississippi, you've arrived here with your family in Nacogdoches. And folks, if you see Brent and Lindsay around, introduce yourself, get to know them. Excited to have them here and part of what's going on in Nacogdoches at SFA and here at Fredonia Hill as well. So that's going to be a wrap for episode 53. But as always, we want to hear from you. So we want to hear how these stories, really, I think the thing that is always so encouraging to us and to our guests is hearing how these stories impact you. And what are the ways that hearing somebody else tell their story, how the Lord has impacted them, how does that impact and change your perspective and what God's doing in your life. So we would love to hear that. You know all the different ways you can reach out to us. We do have an email. Blake normally says
our
it,
favorite.
I don't think he's going to say it anymore. I think this is season 3, and he's done saying the email.
It'll be in the show notes.
It'll be in the show notes. That's what we're going to start saying.
Yeah.
Aren't we cool that we have something called show notes? So anyway, but seriously, Brent, thanks for coming along, and we will see you on episode 54. Adios.